Have you ever wanted to go down a rabbit hole of morbid history, but you don't know where to start? What about hearing a weird snippet of history and wanting to learn more about it? Then you're in the right spot. Welcome inquirers, new and old, to Our Grim Past. I'm your host, Sophia. Each week, join me and my co-host Maya as we explore the dark, morbid, and altogether fucked up moments of history. I remember being obsessed with Pompeii growing up. One of my favorite morbid history books is Ice Pick Surgeon by Sam Kean. Kean did such an amazing job depicting the whys on so many gruesome topics. I couldn't get enough. While it was fun to learn on my own, I have always loved to discuss my findings with others. We are excited to help form a discussion all about the topics we cover.
Hi, I'm the co-host Maya. I first got into morbid history when I was in elementary school after I started reading weird historical fiction books. Then I really started learning more about it after my high school history classes. I had a European history class, and the pivot point for me was learning about the Habsburg family and the Romanov family. Currently, I am a history major as well, so clearly I was interested enough in history to try and make a career out of it. Sophia and I met in high school, and then we also have classes together this year, so I was invited to co-host our podcast. I'm super excited to be here and talk about history. Speaking of, Sophia, you mentioned that you really liked Pompeii. Would you want to elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah, the summer between my 3rd and 4th grade year in elementary school, I had to do summer school, and we read books about Pompeii. And I was like, that's interesting. So I just kept delving into it, like just how everything was well preserved. And more recently, I've actually come across the history of Herculaneum, which was also a city that was affected by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. It was actually closer to the eruption, but it is way better preserved because nobody visits.
Wow.
And you mentioned the Habsburg family. Want to elaborate on that?
I do. So in my European history class, we started talking about the Habsburg family, and it was just so interesting to me. That was the same year I also had biology, so we were learning about like genetic diseases and stuff. So I went on a bit of a rabbit hole, and if the listeners don't know, the Habsburg family were the ruling family of the Spanish Empire, and they had a lot of incest in their family due to the fact that they didn't want their family to fall out of power, so they just kept marrying into it. And specifically, you may have heard of the Habsburg chin or the Habsburg jaw, which, if you want to know, go ahead and look up pictures. It's kind of insane looking, and it just kept getting more and more disformed until the last ruler of the Habsburg family, Charles II, who he couldn't even close his mouth because his jaw was so deformed, which is interesting.
Wow.
And if you guys want to know more, go ahead and subscribe to our podcast and tune in to our Habsburg episode that will be out soon.
You also mentioned the Romanovs.
Yes, so they were the last Tsar family of the Russian Empire, and they fell in 1917 after the Russian Revolution. And you probably have heard of Princess Anastasia, or at least seen the Disney movie. And there's an idea that she survived the family's execution. She didn't. That is incorrect. But I was obsessed with the movie when I was little, and then we learned more about it in my history classes. And I especially was interested in Alexei Romanov, who was also thought to have survived, but he did not. And he was the last Tsarevich, like the prince who would have inherited the Russian Empire. And he himself also struggled with a genetic disease of the Romanov family, but he died at 13 by gunshot before actually succumbing to his illness. There will also be an episode about that.
Okay, so you mentioned the Tsarevich. This is kind of a tangent.
Yeah.
We both read The Brothers Karamazov in high school.
Oh my god.
The whole, Ovich, the Russian surnames, that was such an interesting... I don't know if your class did.
No, we talked a lot about different things.
It was so interesting.
In the Russian language, there's different things you add on to different people's names depending on how close you are, whether they're male or female. And it's quite interesting. We should talk a bit about that during our Romanov family.
We should.
Episode. Also, I'm just gonna keep yapping, but for the Habsburg family, another fun fact is that you probably all know who Marie Antoinette is. She's a very famous woman. Let them eat cake, right? She was actually part of the Habsburg family, but she wasn't a direct descendant of, like, the Spanish Empire line, so she was not as affected by the, all the genetic stuff, but she did have, like, a very protruding lower lip, but she didn't have the Habsburg chin, but she was also considered to be one of the most, like, beautiful women of the time. So that's interesting, and we might have a little bit more for Marie Antoinette later.
Oh, yeah.
If you guys love her, I do too, and I will yap forever. Because I also, going back to what you were talking about with Pompeii, I'm super interested about Herculaneum.
Yes. Yeah, Herculaneum. We're also really excited to do an episode over Pompeii and Herculaneum, just to go into even more of a deep dive for you guys.
I'm so excited. For Sophia, what other historical things are you really interested in?
Okay, so recently I have gone down a really, really deep rabbit hole of grave robbing.
Ooh.
You got to hear a little bit of a sneak preview.
I did.
The intricacies and the laws around grave robbing are so interesting because, like, technically you could have the body, you just couldn't be caught digging up the grave, and you couldn't take anything other than the body from the grave. But also the difference between European and, like, the global north, and what they did when they robbed graves versus when Europeans would rob graves in, like, the global south. So I'm really excited to get into an episode about that as well.
Also, isn't there a difference between grave robbing and body snatching?
Yes. Another thing that I can't wait to get into with you guys. Another really interesting rabbit hole I've gone down is piracy.
Ooh.
So I bet you think of the swashbuckling Jack Sparrow type pirates when someone says piracy.
That's my favorite.
Or you think of, like, stealing movies or music off of the internet. A more modern type of piracy. But that is, like, just the history and the reasons behind piracy are so incredibly interesting. And, like, the fact that a lot of times a lot of pirates would actually be scientists, and the only way they could get out to discover and explore things was through piracy, because state and federally funded governments, they wouldn't send out their people for that. So tune in. From shipwrecks and spooky places to morally questionable people and practices, let us help you scratch that morbid itch.
So if you want to learn more without the hassle of a Google deep dive, let us do the hard work for you. Subscribe to Our Grim Past and
join us in our morbid time machine,
and let's discuss history's most fucked up.
Stay curious. There's so much more to uncover.